March 23rd, 2006, a seemingly ordinary Thursday in the small community of Santa Rita, rural area Juazeiro do Norte, in the interior of Ceará. The sky was clear, with a few scattered clouds, and the temperature was close to tritões and cinerars, typical of the transition period between summer and autumn in that semi-arid region of northeast Brazil. José Antonio Ferreira, 43 years old, and his wife Maria das Graças Oliveira, 39 years old, started that day like any other. A simple, hard-working couple, loved by the local community. José was a farmer, working on the small property he inherited from his father, where he grew mainly corn, beans, and cassava. Maria supplemented the family income by selling cakes and tapioca that she made by hand in a small wood-fired oven built in the backyard. They had 3 children, 2 already adults who live in the capital Fortaleza, and a 16-year-old teenager, Pedro, who still lived with his parents. That morning, Pedro left early for school, located about 5 kilometers from his home in the neighboring community. He remembers saying goodbye to his parents around 6:30. My father was drinking coffee, getting ready to go to the farm. My mother was in the kitchen, making tapioca to sell later. It was a normal day. Nothing seemed different. The young man would later report to the authorities. According to neighbors, José was last seen around 7:15 when he left home towards the field. He wore a faded blue plaid shirt, worn jeans, and a straw hat, his usual attire for his work in the fields. He carried a hoe and a thermos of coffee with him. Maria, in turn, was last seen by Dona Francisca, a neighbor who lived about 300 m away, when she passed in front of Ferreira's house around 9 a.m. She was in the backyard near the oven preparing tapioca dough. I waved and she waved back. Smiling as always, said the neighbor. The disappearance would only be noticed hours later, when Pedro returned from school around 5 p.m. and found the house empty. Initially, the teenager was not alarmed. It was common for their parents to spend the day away working. However, when night fell and neither of them returned, the young man began to grow worried. Around 8 p.m., Pedro decided to seek help at Dona Francisca's house. The boy arrived desperate, saying that his parents had not returned home. I thought it was strange because Maria would never leave her son alone without warning, the neighbor reported. A small, impromptu search began that same night, with some neighbors checking the field and nearby areas, using flashlights and lanterns, but to no avail. The next morning, March 24th, the situation became officially alarming. The bed linens remained intact, the couple's clothes were in their proper places, and there were no signs that they were planning a trip. In the field, José was found leaning against a tree, and his thermos was half empty, indicating that he had been working normally that day. In the house, the tapioca dough prepared by Maria was dry on the table, and the wood-burning oven in the backyard had fresh ashes, suggesting it had been used that morning. Pedro and his neighbors searched for a few more hours before finally calling the Juazeiro do Norte police. The police report filed at 2:37 p.m. on March 24th, 2006, was the official beginning of what would become one of the most intriguing and disturbing cases in the criminal history of Ceará. The first police team arrived at the Ferreira property around 4 p.m. that same day. Sergeant Clayton Mendez, who commanded the team, carried out an initial inspection of the house and land. There were no obvious signs of struggle or violence. The house was organized. The doors were not broken into. The few valuables remained there. It didn't seem like a typical robbery or home invasion, he said in his first report. The official search began immediately with a team of 6 police officers and about 20 community volunteers. They searched the fields, nearby wooded areas, country roads, and even a small pond located 2 kilometers from the property. Sniffer dogs were brought in from Fortaleza the next day, but were unable to establish a consistent trail. It's as if they simply vanished, commented one of the officers involved in the initial search. News of the disappearance spread quickly throughout the region. The couple's 2 oldest children, Carlos, 24, and Ana, 22, immediately returned from Fortaleza to help with the search and care for their younger brother. It didn't make sense. Our parents had no enemies. They weren't involved in anything illegal. They were simple, hard-working people who just wanted to live in peace, Carlos told journalists who were beginning to arrive in the community. If you want to follow more cases like this, which shake up society as a whole and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigations. The first days after Jose and Maria's disappearance were marked by intense searches and growing perplexity. The Juazeiro do Norte Homicide Department took over the case under the command-in-chief of Police Rodrigo Vasconcelos, who appointed investigator Paulo Gomez as lead investigator. From the beginning, we treated it as a high-priority case. A couple disappearing simultaneously without apparent motive raises many questions, the chief of police stated in an interview with the local press. The first line of investigation focused on possible financial problems or land disputes. Authorities discovered that Jose had recently turned down an offer to sell his property to a local businessman interested in expanding his land for cattle ranching. However, according to statement from neighbors, the refusal had been amicable without any major tensions. Joseph simply said that the land was a family inheritance and that he intended to pass it on to his children. The buyer understood and didn't insist, reported a neighbor. The couple's bank statements, obtained with court authorization, revealed a modest but stable financial situation. There were no significant debts, unpaid loans, or suspicious transactions. The few funds there were intact, which weakened the hypothesis of a planned escape. Another line of investigation emerged when a neighbor mentioned that, about 2 weeks before the disappearance, an unknown vehicle had been seen parked a few times near the Ferreira property. It was a dark car, perhaps black or navy blue. I can't say the make. It wasn't common to see unusual cars around here, said Raimundo, who lived about 1 kilometer from the couple's home. However, despite their efforts, the police were unable to identify the vehicle or its owner. The statements of the couple's 3 children were meticulously analyzed. All presented solid alibis for the day of the disappearance. Carlos was working at a construction materials store in Fortaleza, with several colleagues confirming his presence. Ana was at college attending classes and participating in a group project, and Pedro was in school the entire time. The day, a fact confirmed by teachers and colleagues. Family relations, according to all accounts, were harmonious. Approximately 2 weeks after the disappearance, the investigation faced its first major obstacle, the rains. A series of storms hit the region for 4 consecutive days, hampering the search and possibly erasing any evidence that might have existed in outdoor areas. It was a stroke of bad luck. Nature didn't cooperate with us, lamented investigator Paulo Gomez. In April 2006, about a month after the disappearance, a seemingly promising lead emerged. An anonymous witness called the police station, claiming to have seen the couple boarding a bus bound for Sao Paulo at the Juazeiro do Norte bus station on the day they disappeared. Police checked all passenger lists from the bus companies operating at the bus station, analyzed security camera footage, and interviewed employees, but found no evidence to corroborate the information. The lead proved false. In May, investigators discovered that Maria had a sister living in Brasilia, with whom she was in contact. Sporadic. The hypothesis that the couple could have traveled there unannounced was investigated, but quickly dismissed. Maria's sister, Joseph Oliveira, came to Sarah to give a statement and assist in the search. My sister would never abandon her children. Something very serious must have happened, she declared, visibly moved. The case began to gain statewide repercussion. Newspaper articles and television programs brought the mystery of the missing couple to light, generating public attention. Posters with photos of Jose and Maria were distributed at bus stations, hospitals, and police stations throughout the Northeast. Media coverage brought some calls reporting possible sightings of the couple in different cities, but all the leads, after thorough verification, proved to be unfounded. 6 months after the disappearance, in September 2006, the investigation began to cool down. Weekly searches were reduced to monthly, then bi-monthly operations. The case remained open, but without significant progress. We're not giving up, but we need to be realistic about the resources available, explained Chief Vasconcelos at press conference. For the family, however, the search never stopped. Carlos left his job in Fortaleza and returned to Juazeiro do Norte to manage the family property and care for his younger brother. Ana finished college, but also returned to her hometown. Together, The Ferreira siblings created a small association dedicated to keeping their parents' memory alive and pressuring the authorities for answers. In 2007, the federal police were involved in the case at the family's request. Federal agents reviewed the evidence collected and conducted new interviews, but were also unable to make significant progress. One hypothesis that gained traction during this period was that the couple could have been victims of a perfect crime, possibly carried out by someone familiar with the family's routine and the region. When we speak of a perfect crime, we are not romanticizing the situation, but recognizing that we are dealing with a case where the perpetrators were extremely careful not to leave any traces, explained federal agent Ricardo Magalhães, assigned to the case. However, experience shows us that over time, even the most meticulous criminals make mistakes or someone eventually talks. In the following years, the case continued to be periodically revisited by the police, especially when new investigative methods became available or when similar cases occurred in the region. In 2010, with the advancement of digital investigation techniques, the couple's few telephone communications were reanalyzed, but without revealing any relevant information. Between 2011 and 2018, the Jose and Maria case, as it became known, became something of a legend in the region. Alternative theories began to circulate, some bordering on the absurd. Alien abductions, escapes to start a new life under new identities, involvement with treasures buried during the Kangako. The tabloid press occasionally exploited these theories, much to the chagrin of the family, who continued to search for concrete answers. During this period, the Ferreira property was maintained by the children, who took turns caring for the land. The oven where Maria made her tapioca remained intact, almost like a memorial. Pedro grew up, graduated, got married, but never gave up hope of finding out what had happened to his parents. I live in limbo, unable to close this chapter. I don't know whether to mourn their death or wait for their return, he stated in an interview in 2018, when the case had been unsolved for 12 years. 2019 brought a radical change in the case. On January 15th, the Juazeiro do Norte Homicide Department welcomed a new chief, Andre Martins, a professional with extensive experience in disappearance and homicide cases. One of his first actions was to review unsolved cases, and the disappearance of Jose and Maria caught his particular attention. I noticed some inconsistencies in the initial reports and decided it was worth taking a fresh look at the case, Martins later explained. The new chief appointed a dedicated team to revisit all the evidence, re-interview key witnesses, and apply new investigative techniques developed in recent years. One of the new team's first actions was to conduct a complete sweep of the Ferreira property using georadar, a device that detects anomalies underground without the need for excavation. This technology, relatively new in Brazil, had recently been acquired by the Ceará State Department of Public Security. We decided to start with the property, not because we suspected the children, but because statistically in missing persons cases, the answers are often closer than we imagine, explained the police chief. On February 23, 2019, during the georadar scan, technicians detected a significant anomaly, precisely under the old wood-fired oven where Maria used to prepare her tapioca. The equipment indicated an unnatural cavity, approximately 1.5 meters below the base of the oven, reported the technician in charge, Marco Silveira. With judicial authorization and in the presence of the couple's children, the team began a careful excavation at the site. After removing the oven structure, which had remained virtually intact since 2006, the investigators dug following the georadar indications. Approximately 1.7 meters deep, they found what appeared to be a makeshift shelter, possibly an old cistern or deactivated well that had been covered by layers of earth, stones, and finally the oven. What the team found inside this cavity shocked even the most experienced investigators. Partially decomposed human remains belonging to two individuals. Along with the remains, they found fragments of fabric that matched the descriptions of clothing Jose and Maria were wearing on the day they disappeared. Scraps of a blue plaid shirt and a floral dress. It was a moment of profound sadness and, paradoxically, relief. After 13 years, we finally had an answer, concrete yet terrible, reported Chief Inspector Martins. The couple's children present during the discovery experienced a whirlwind of emotions. It's hard to describe what I felt. On the one hand, confirmation of something I feared deep down in my heart. On the other, a strange sense of closure, said Carlos. The remains were carefully removed and sent to the Fortaleza Institute of Forensic Medicine for detailed analysis. DNA tests confirmed that they were, in fact, Jose Antonio Ferreira and Maria das Graças Oliveira. Forensic analysis revealed more. Both had skull fractures consistent with blunt force trauma, indicating a violent death. Even more surprising was the discovery that the cavity under the oven had been prepared in advance. It wasn't a hastily dug hole. There was evidence of meticulous work, with walls reinforced with bricks in some spots. This suggests premeditation, explained forensic expert Dr. Luia Campos. The investigation gained new momentum. With concrete evidence of homicide, the police began searching no longer for a missing couple, but for those responsible for a premeditated and meticulously executed double murder. Covered up, a new round of interviews with neighbors, acquaintances, and potential witnesses began. In March 2019, a crucial clue emerged. Sebastio Alves, a farmhand who had briefly worked for Jose in 2006, voluntarily contacted the police after learning of the discovery of the bodies. His testimony provided surprising information. About 2 weeks before the disappearance, I saw 3 men talking to Jose in the fields. The conversation seemed tense. One of them was farmer Ernesto Cavalcante, who wanted to buy the land. I had never seen the other 2 before. Sebastio explained that he hadn't mentioned this fact previously because he feared for his safety, as Ernesto Cavalcante was an influential man in the region. He had a reputation for solving problems his way, the worker stated. Ernesto Cavalcante, the farmer mentioned, was precisely the businessman who had made an offer to buy the Ferreira property months before the disappearance. At the time, police had interviewed him briefly, but his denial of any involvement, coupled with a lack of concrete evidence, had closed that line of investigation. With the new testimony, the police began to investigate the farmer and his inner circle more deeply. It was discovered in 2006 that Cavalcante was aggressively expanding his holdings, acquiring land from small farmers to implement an ambitious cattle ranching project. The Ferreira property, strategically located with access to a perennial stream, was particularly valuable to his plans. Jose's refusal to sell the land may have been the trigger for something much more sinister than we initially imagined, theorized Chief Martins. Leave a comment and never give up on the truth if you believe that all missing people deserve to be found. The investigation into Ernesto Cavalcante progressed rapidly after the discovery of the bodies. With court orders, the police began monitoring his communications and movements. In April 2019, investigators were able to identify the 2 men who, according to witness Sebastio, were the farmer on the Ferreira property weeks before the disappearance. Claudio Mendez and Jorge Santos, trusted employees of Cavalcante. On April 27th, the police carried out a coordinated operation, simultaneously arresting Claudio and Jorge. Confronted separately with the evidence and the possibility of a long sentence, the 2 were quick to break their silence, albeit with slightly different versions of events. According to Claudio, the original plan was just to pressure the couple to sell the land. Cavalcante was obsessed with that property. He said that without it, his irrigation project for livestock would not work. He told us to scare them. Just that, he stated in his testimony. George, in turn, claimed that the farmer had been more explicit. He said he wanted that land at any cost, and that if Joseph didn't take it for granted, he would take it for evil. The testimonies revealed that on the morning of March 23rd, 2006, Claudio and Jorge went to Ferreira property with the initial intention of intimidating the couple. They knew their teenage son would be at school and chose that specific time. Arriving there, they found Joseph working in the fields and Mary in the yard next to the oven. Things out of hand, Claudio admitted. According to him, Jose reacted to the threats, stating that he would never sell the land that was his family's inheritance. A heated argument escalated into physical violence. Jorge lost his head and hit Jose with the hoe. He fell, bleeding heavily. Then we realized that the woman had seen everything from the kitchen door. The 2 chased Maria, who tried to escape into the house. She screamed that she was going to call the police, that she knew who we were, that we worked for Cavalcante. Jorge reported, "We had no choice. She would identify us. Maria was silenced in the same way as her husband, with blows to the head. With two bodies in their hands and panic taking over, the men called Cavalcante, asking for guidance. The farmer, according to both, ordered the bodies to be disposed of so that they would never be found. He said he would come over to help, but we should start digging, Claudio declared. It was then that the old, deactivated cistern beneath the kiln came to mind. Jorge, who knew the property well from having worked briefly for Jose years before, knew of the dry well. We decided it would be the perfect hiding place. Who would think of looking under a kiln that was used daily, he recounted. The three men worked for hours, deepening the cistern, depositing the bodies, and then carefully rebuilding the kiln above. The work was completed shortly before Pedro returned from school. The killers had already left the property, taking with them any incriminating evidence. Based on these statements, Ernesto Cavalcante was arrested on April 30th, 2019, on his farm. Unlike his henchmen, the farmer vehemently denied any involvement in the murders. I am the victim of a conspiracy. These men work for me, yes, but I never ordered any violence, he declared in his first statement. However, the investigation revealed overwhelming evidence against Cavalcante. Phone records confirmed multiple calls between him and his two employees on the day he disappeared. A search at his farm uncovered documents suggesting an elaborate plan to acquire several properties in the region, including specific notes about the Ferreira land, described as essential and with the observation to resolve by April 2006. Even more significant was the testimony of his former accountant, who claimed to have prepared purchase and sale documents for the Ferreira property, with forged signatures shortly after the disappearance. He told me that the couple had accepted the proposal and moved to Sao Paulo, but needed the paperwork in order quickly, reported the accountant, who ended up becoming a key witness for the prosecution. In September 2019, Ernesto Cavalcante, Claudio Mendez, and Jorge Santos were formally charged by the public prosecutor's office with the crimes of double qualified homicide, concealment of a corpse, formation of a criminal gang, and document forgery. The trial held in May 2020 became one of the most emblematic in the judicial history of Serra. After 3 weeks of intense debate, the judges were found guilty of all charges. Cavalcante was sentenced to 42 years in prison, while Claudio and Jorge received sentences of 38 years each, with a small reduction for their cooperation with the investigation. For the Ferreira family, the outcome of the case brought a mix of justice and renewed pain. We can finally give our parents a dignified burial and move forward, knowing that those responsible are paying for their crimes, Ana said after sentencing. But nothing will bring our parents back. Nothing will fill the void of these 13 years of uncertainty and suffering. The Ferreira property remains in the family to this day. Carlos, the eldest son, decided to transform part of the land into a small nature reserve named Memorial Jose y Maria. The old oven was preserved not as a reminder of the crime, but as a symbol of the persistence of truth. For 13 years, this oven kept a terrible secret. Now, it represents our relentless search for answers and our refusal to give up, he explained. The Ferreira couple's case became a landmark in Brazilian criminal history and a powerful example of how the truth, no matter how buried, eventually finds its way to the surface. It also inspired changes in investigative procedures related to disappearances in the state of Serra, including the creation of a specialized unit and the acquisition of modern equipment, such as georadar, which was crucial to solving this case. For rural communities in the interior of Brazil, where land disputes occasionally result in violence, the case served as a wake-up call about the importance of community vigilance and reporting suspicious behavior. If someone had spoken about those men visiting the property sooner, maybe my parents would still be alive, Pedro reflected in a documentary about the case produced in 2021. Jose and Maria's story also reminds us that behind the statistics of missing persons in Brazil, more than 80,000 per year, there are families waiting for answers, communities affected, and often painful truths waiting to be uncovered. The Ferreira couple's case didn't end with the conviction of the guilty parties. In the years following the trial, a series of developments expanded the scope and significance of this tragedy, transforming it into a catalyst for important changes in Brazil's disappearance investigation system. In November 2020, 6 months after conviction of Cavalcante and his accomplices, the Serra State Legislative Assembly approved the Jose and Maria Law, State Law Number 17, for 32/2020, which established specific protocols for missing persons cases, including the requirement that searches begin immediately without the traditional 24-hour waiting period. The law also created an integrated database for missing persons in the state and secured resources for the acquisition of advanced investigative technologies. "It's a bittersweet victory," commented Carlos Ferreira during the law's signing ceremony. "We lost our parents, but their legacy will now help save other families from the anguish we've endured for 13 years. The impact of the case has transcended the borders of Serra. In 2021, delegates from 14 Brazilian states participated in a seminar in Fortaleza to study the methodology that led to the solution of the case. The use of ground-based radar, the systematic review of old evidence with new perspectives, and the perseverance of the team led by Delegate Andre Martins became a case study for long-standing disappearance investigations. "The Ferreira case taught us that no disappearance should be considered unsolved," stated Delegate Martins, who went on to coordinate a department specializing in unsolved cases. "Sometimes the answer is literally right under our feet, waiting for us to have the tools and determination to find it." The media coverage was also significant. In 2022, a documentary series produced by an international streaming platform chronicled the case in 6 episodes, interviewing investigators, family members, and community residents. The series, entitled Under the Oven, The Buried Truth, received critical acclaim and raised awareness about disappearances in Brazil. For the children of Joseph and Mary, the following years brought a slow but steady rebuilding of their lives. Pedro, the youngest son, who was only 16 when he lost his parents, graduated in law and now works in the public prosecutor's office, dedicated himself especially to cases involving rural disputes and crimes against small farmers. "I turned my pain into purpose," he explained in a talk, "for law students in 2023. Every time I achieve justice for a rural family, I feel like I am honoring the memory of my parents." Ana, the middle child, became a psychologist specializing in trauma and grief, helping families of missing persons cope with uncertainty and grief. His work with the Brazilian Association of Relatives of Missing Persons has been recognized nationally. Carlos, the eldest son, remained on the family property, transforming it into a model of sustainable family farming. The Jose and Maria Memorial, initially just a small preservation space, has expanded to include an educational center that welcomes schools and researchers interested in agroecology and the history of smallholder farmers' resistance in the semi-arid Northeast. The Ferreira family story also brought to light a broader and more persistent problem in Brazil: agrarian conflicts and rural violence. According to data from the Pastoral Land Commission (CPT), between 1985 and 2022, more than 1,500 rural workers were murdered in land conflict in the country, many of which remain unpunished. The Ferreira case is exceptional, not because of the crime itself, which is unfortunately common in our rural reality, but because of the resolution and punishment of the perpetrators, observed Professor Antonio Canuto, historian and researcher of agrarian conflicts, in an academic article published in 2023. The vast majority of similar crimes are never even properly investigated, much less solved. This observation points to another important consequence of the case: the exposure of inequalities in access to justice in Brazil. If it weren't for family persistence, the media coverage, and, ultimately, the renewed interest of a determined police chief, the truth probably would never have come to light. In 2024, on the 18th anniversary of their disappearance, a solemn ceremony was held at the Jose and Maria Memorial. Authorities, human rights activists, and hundreds of people from the community gathered to honor not only the Ferreiras, but all victims of rural violence. During the ceremony, a new space was inaugurated at the memorial: the Agrarian Conflict Documentation and Memory Center, an archive that gathers information on similar cases throughout the Northeast. This place is not just about death and delayed justice, but about life and resistance. Pedro declared during the inauguration, "Every document kept here, every story preserved is a way of saying that we have not forgotten, that we have not normalized violence, that we continue to fight for a country where no rural worker need fear for their life when defending their land." As for the convicts, their stories also had significant developments. Ernesto Cavalcante, the person who ordered the murders, died in prison in 2023 at the age of 78 due to heart complications. Claudio Mendez and Jorge Santos continue to serve their sentences, having had their requests for prison progression repeatedly denied due to the severity of their crimes. Interestingly, Jorge Santos, the youngest of those convicted, began collaborating with researchers and law students, giving statements about his involvement in the crime, as a way of warning about the dangers of involvement with powerful people willing to commit illegal acts. I destroyed not only 2 innocent lives, but my own as well, all out of loyalty to a man who saw me as disposable, stated in an educational documentary produced by the Court of Justice of Serra. The Jose and Maria Ferreira case therefore represents much more than a resolution of a 13-year-old mystery, has become a symbol of the fight for justice in the countryside, a catalyst for change in public policy, and a powerful reminder that, no matter how deeply buried, the truth eventually finds its way to the light. If you watch this far, it's because you care about these cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far so I can get to know you," and know who really cares about the search for truth. Don't forget to like this video and share it with people who value real stories that make us reflect on justice and perseverance. S.